Welcome back. All right, so since it's March, it's not April, since it's March, I wanted to talk about where teams are at and grade them. We're three-quarters of the way through the season. We got one quarter left to go. So who are overachieving? Which teams are underachieving? And this is compared to the expectations set before the season started. There were a lot of prognosticators who figured the East would stay exactly the same top eight teams, and that the West could be a little bit more in flux. And New Jersey really changed the narrative when it comes to the East. New Jersey, the reason I'm wearing the Devils, they have turned that points percentage last year of 384 and almost doubled it with 710. So absolutely fantastic. I think even for Devils fans, this season's gone better than anyone could have expected. That being said, Boston, kind of the same thing, 103 points, 831 points percentage. Last year it was 652. So if I'm grading this on what was expected, and that's how I grade this, and I know there's people who fast forward to the end and go, I can't believe this team got this at this grade. They're lower than that team, and that team got this grade. It's about expectation. But Boston, in terms of where they were expected to be this year, it has to be an A plus. Like there's no. I mean, I could put A plus plus plus, but it's just that's ridiculousness. Just an A plus is fine. Technically, an A plus is kind of not necessary either. Most classes I had in school, there wasn't an A plus. You can write the plus next to it on the paper, but we all know what you actually did. So Boston gets that. Now behind them, Carolina 90 points, 738 points percentage. Last year they had a 707. Normally a 738 would be enough to get you the President's Trophy. Last year, Florida had the President's Trophy with a 744, and that was one of the better marks we've seen in hockey history as well. So for Carolina, I'm going to give them an A as well. Now they don't get the A plus. Boston basically setting records is going to give them the A plus. But for Carolina, very solid season overall. There's really no complaints. And now since the trade deadline, the scoring has showed up, and that was the one area that you could look at with Carolina and say, I don't know, can they score enough? Adding Ghost has definitely helped. I talked about Ghost. I've talked up Ghost for years. It's nice to see him get out of Arizona, and now people get to see just how good he is. For Carolina, it's got to be an A. New Jersey, 88 points, 710 points percentage. Last year was a 384. I'm wearing Devils. For the New Jersey Devils, it has to be an A plus. The Devils got off to an excellent start this year, and they have continued. They had a couple of weeks that were kind of rough for them in January, but overall, it has been pretty smooth sailing for New Jersey, which has to throw off their fans a little bit because they got to be used to some kind of setback somewhere. Even the last time they made the playoffs, they weren't a favorite. They got knocked out in the first round, which wasn't really a surprise. But this time out, they're going to be a favorite in that first round matchup. Whether they catch Carolina and end up playing a wild card or they end up playing the Rangers in the first round as a number two seed, they're likely to be a favorite. And so that says a lot about how far New Jersey's come. Toronto, 84 points, 667 points percentage. Last year, they had a 701 points percentage. I think they've done well considering the injuries on the blue line. I think their blue line's underrated. It is interesting to see Rasmus Sandin go to Washington and immediately turn it around. And start scoring points and goals and everything. We'll see how sustainable that is. It does happen where a guy will have a bump when he goes to a new team, and it may not last. But for Toronto, I'm going to give Toronto a solid. I'm going to give them a B plus. I'm going to give them a B plus. I think there's been some moments this year for Toronto where they've been down. I know that on my most recent power rankings, it was we've got them too high. Okay, well they were too low last week. So at any rate. Which means they're probably right about the right spot. But for Toronto, where they are in the standings, fourth overall, it looks like that's probably where they'll end up getting locked in. According to points percentages, fourth is the most likely spot that they end up anyways, right? That's why I wanted to include the points percentages because some teams might be having a better season than another, and yet the points totals could end up being the same, but the amount of games played aren't necessarily. Speaking of which, you've got the Vegas Golden Knights, 82 points, 651 points percentage last year of 573. Vegas has had their ups and downs along the way. They've had injury problems again this year. But even without Stone right now, they're playing quite well. And they're at the top of the Western Conference. And with that 651, odds are with Dallas at 633 and LA at 631, they're probably going to end up winning the West altogether. So for the Vegas Golden Knights, I'm just thinking like with the goaltending, everything else they've dealt with, I'll go with an A minus. I'm a very fair teacher. I would have been lousy. It would have been, why do all your kids have really good grades? It's based on expectation. Little Jimmy there, he's been eating a lot of glue, and the fact he got 15 out of 40, it's nothing short of remarkable. So, anyways, Vegas, I'll give them an A minus. LA, 82 points for them, 631 points percentage. Last year was a 604. The thing with LA, of course, is their save percentage has been low throughout most of the season. So they fixed that by getting Korpisalo. It's a PR nightmare in that they trade Jonathan Quick as part of that. Quick ends up going to Vegas, which I think blunts some of that anger and frustration because now he's in Vegas. So there's the fascination of what happens if they meet in the playoffs. It's highly unlikely they'd meet in the first round, but they absolutely could meet in the second round, and that could be fantastic. For the fact that LA has the 82 points, they're right up there with Vegas. I'll give them the same grade as Vegas. I'll say A minus. And the minus being because it took them so long to make that move with the goaltending. But there was a lot of courage too in them sending down Peterson and bringing up Copley. And they tried to move Peterson's contract apparently, and there just weren't any takers. So Quick ends up being the guy that goes and then ends up in Vegas after. Now we get to Dallas. Dallas is a tough one because they have 81 points. They have a 633 points percentage, and last year it was a 598. But a lot of their points coming from overtime and shootout losses. They've been mediocre since the start of January. It's been trending in the wrong direction, even though they probably still end up winning the division. I say that, though I think Colorado has every reason to be seen as a dark horse to win that division at this point. And maybe not that much of a dark horse when you look at Dallas's overall record. I know what Dallas did to Colorado last week, but the reality is that I still think that in a 7-game series, I would take Colorado over Dallas. Dallas, I'm going to give them a B overall, which is the lowest grade I've given out so far, but there's a lot of overtime losses in there. Then you get to the 2 at 79 points. This is where it's weird. You've got Tampa Bay and the Rangers. Both currently have 79 points. Both have 627 points percentages. And last year, both had 671 points percentages. So on this front, Tampa Bay and the Rangers, were they expected to both be in this same spot? Would they have been expected to have about the same points totals? Probably. So for Tampa, overall, I would say it's been a good season. Their points total is down. There's a lot of teams that are. We don't have that huge separation between the top and the East and the bottom, so that means the points totals have been more spread out in the East than they were last season. And I kind of feel like I have to grade Tampa Bay and the Rangers at the same time here. I would say I'm leaning towards a B for both. And recent play has me wondering if Tampa Bay should be at a B minus. And then you've got Shesterkin's kind of fallen off with the Rangers, but they're still winning. So one thing that was said with the Rangers last year was without Shesterkin, they may not have even been a playoff team because of how many games he stole. So, yeah, I'll go with a B for the Rangers. I'll go with a B minus for Tampa Bay. I'm okay with that. The comment section may disagree, but that's where I'm putting them. Seattle, 78 points, 619 points percentage. Last year it was a 366. Almost every move made by Ron Francis has worked. Seattle wasn't expected to be anywhere near here. On The Athletic, when they had their staff vote on who was going to make the playoffs, 0% took Seattle. None. So, Seattle has to get an A. Their goaltending is better than last year. It's not a ton better, but it's better. Their defense has been better. And the amount of really prime shots that their goaltending sees has dropped off quite a bit from where it was last year. And their goal scoring is better than last year. That last year they had 60 points. This year they have 78. So yeah, they're playing with house money. If not for New Jersey's remarkable turnaround, I'd be wearing a Seattle jersey instead. So that's your first column. We get into the second column. We've got Minnesota Wild, 78 points, 619 points percentage. Last year that was a 689. Now recently, I'd give them an A for the way they've been playing over the last month. Overall, the overall number drags it down a bit. It's a B. I'm not going to drag them down any further than that. Again, their recent play would give them an A, but for their overall work through the first 3 quarters of the season, I'll give them a B. They're in the mix. Kaprizov's playing well. He's not going to hit 100 points again this year, but that's okay. I think he would accept 94, 95 points and a chance at a Stanley Cup. Which for Minnesota, of course, as much as people might chuckle about the idea of Minnesota going on a run, at some point in time it should happen, right? So why not Minnesota? The Central right now is wide open. Why not Minnesota is the team to come out of it? And if your answer is because the Avs exist, I can't argue with that. So the Oilers 78 points last year. They were last year they were 634. This year they're 600. So they dropped off there. I like the addition of Ekholm at the deadline. I like the way this team looks right now. I think that for the season they've had so far, I'd give them a B minus. I think there's definitely more improvement that could be had there. I do worry about the scoring depth a bit because, again, once you get into the playoffs, if a team can shut down McDavid, and that's an if. But even if McDavid's going and scoring 2 points a game, but that's all you're getting is 2 goals a game, then you're likely to win. And I don't know that the Oilers have that offensive depth right now, but we'll see when the playoffs roll around. For Winnipeg, this is an interesting one. 75 points. Last year they had a 543 points percentage. This year it's a 586. However, Winnipeg has had kind of a disastrous run over the last month and a half. And you get into these games where you say, okay, Winnipeg, they've got to know they have to win this one. They've got to know. Like last night against San Jose. San Jose, one of the lesser, right down here, almost at the bottom of the league. You're at home, you've got a lead late in the game. They blew it, and then they lost in the overtime. And their defense, which is normally one of their hallmarks, especially under bonus, it's important to have that defense, and it's really kind of started to fall apart for them. So for the Jets, they are up from where they were last year. They're still a playoff team, but for their overall performance, I'm throwing them at a C plus. It's the first C that's shown up on the board because I haven't been that impressed with them for about a month now. And it feels like the overall picture is still a C plus. They're still going to make the playoffs, but with the way they've been playing, they look like they could be an easy exit. Colorado, 74 points. They have a 607 points percentage. Last year it was a 726. They've gone through a lot of injuries. They've had some downbeats along the way too. I would say for Colorado, I'll throw them a B minus. Again, a lot of injuries, a lot of problems going on with them. They've also had some losing streaks in there and everything. Then they had their 6-game winning streak that got snapped by Dallas, and so we'll see what happens with them following that, how they respond. But yeah, overall, I'd say a B minus. Then you get to the Islanders, 72 points, a 554 points percentage. Last year it was a 512. And I think a lot of us figured they'd bounce back, but whether they'd be above or below the playoff line was really where the questions came in. For the Islanders, for the season they've had, Sorokin's been absolutely fantastic. Arguably should have the Vezina this year. I say arguably because saying that, people will mention other goaltenders like Ullmark, like Hellebuck, those being the big three right now. But for how the Islanders have done, comparatively speaking with expectation, I'll give them a B. I think they've done well. Again, I grade pretty generously. So, yeah, it's a B for me with the New York Islanders. Now, for Pittsburgh, 71 points, a 573 points percentage. Last year was the 628. And it has been a wildly up and down season for Pittsburgh. They have these big long winning streaks, long losing streaks, long winning streaks, long losing streaks. So I'm just going to go right in the middle. I'm going to say C. I'm going to say overall a C. This is a team that I don't think has overachieved. I don't know that we can argue they've underachieved either. And so a C, kind of an average. That's kind of what we might have expected from them kind of situation. What's interesting is that above the line, in red, those are your playoff teams. Below the line are your non-playoff teams. There is one team with a better points percentage below the playoff line than above. And that's the Nashville Predators, who at a 566 are sitting 5 points out of the playoffs. They would be 2 points out in the East. They have a better points percentage than the New York Islanders, and they're almost equivalent to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and yet they sold at the deadline. They do have, as I mentioned in last night's recap video, a pretty generous schedule from here. Like it's a schedule where Nashville could pull themselves back into this. Now, Nashville overall on the season, I'm going to give them a C plus because they're still in the mix. They're still there. and it seems to be against the odds that they are, but they're still there. I'm going to give them a C plus. We'll find out over the next few weeks whether or not that fall that the Jets have been having is going to end up costing them, because it's a 6 point difference between these two teams. It is a 20 percentage points difference between these two teams, but it feels like Nashville's trending in that right direction, even with the trades, and Winnipeg's trending in the other direction. So that's going to be something to watch. Calgary, 69 points, a 539 points percentage. Last year was a 677. So for Calgary, this is going to be the first. I'm going to give them a D, because I think Calgary should be better than this. I think they're a better team than this. Early in the season, they looked great, and they fell off. Now, I've also mentioned that when you look at their lineup, there isn't that swath of great talent that you might see with a Tampa, even with Vegas, with Carolina, with Boston. They really need to rely on the hard work, and they need to rely on a lot of the stuff that doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. And I can't say they're not doing that, but the results would tell you that it's just not working like it did last year. So Calgary, again, a team that can't seem to follow up a good season with another good season. Well, we're still got enough time left for them to correct it, but I don't know that they can. Buffalo, 68 points, 548 points percentage. Last year was a 457. So compared to last year and what was expected of them, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B, because honestly, Buffalo is on their way up. And if they don't make it this year, it's not the end of the world. If they're still playing games that matter in March, which they are, that to me is a win. That's something that if I had told Buffalo fans before the season, hey, you're not going to get in the playoffs, but you're going to be playing games that, still mean something at the end of February, early March, I think fans would have taken that. So while if they fall short, it's going to be considered a disappointment, the fact this team's above 500, the fact they're this close to the playoffs, has to be seen as a positive. Then you've got Ottawa. Now, 68 points for them as well, 540 points percentage. Last year was a 445. The expectations were higher for Ottawa, right? There were some who expected them to be in the playoffs. There were some who expected them to be, ready to play spoiler already. But it hasn't quite turned out the way that was expected. Now, for me on the season, I'm going to throw them a B minus. I wanted to throw them a B plus, but there's just been so many times where it looks like they're ready to go on a run, and it just kind of falls apart on them. But this, again, much like Buffalo, keep an eye on Ottawa next year. I think the Atlantic Division next year could be the toughest division. The Metros had that reputation for a long time. I think it's going to be the Atlantic starting as soon as next year. It'll depend on what Boston, Toronto, and Tampa do. If all three of them stay in that spot, if Buffalo and Ottawa keep getting better, and of course other Atlantic Division teams have to keep up too. But yeah, the Atlantic could be really, really tough. Which brings us to Florida, 68 points, a 531 points percentage, but last year, 744. And this is a team that should be in a higher spot. And I've seen so many games this year where before the game started, I've said to myself, okay, Florida should win this. They know how important this is. Florida should win it, and they don't. So for me on the season, I would give Florida a D. I would say, nope, this has not been their year. And again, the expectations were much higher. There was also the expectation too, though, in refreshing my memory by going through the Athletic article, they had a vote with their staff on who was likely to be the most disappointing team in the NHL this year. Florida won that vote. So there was some belief that Florida overachieved last year, and that the trades in the offseason didn't help them. And it would appear that both of those things were true. That the trades in the offseason weren't ones that benefited them as much, and that they overachieved a bit last year. Now we get to this column. You get to the Capitals, 68 points, 523 points percentage. Last year they had a 610. I would say based on the injury to Backstrom, based on how long Wilson was out, Carlson's been out, I don't know how much more we could have expected from the Caps. So I'm not going to give them a great mark, but I'm going to give them a C minus, because again, there's been a lot of injuries. There are some built-in excuses here that are reasons more than excuses, that are actual valid reasons why Washington's had their struggles. The problem is those players all get a year older going into next season, and you're likely to see further erosion of where Washington is in the standings if they don't have those young guys coming in. So I agreed with them selling at the deadline. I think that was a smart move. Detroit, 65 points, 516 points percentage. Last year it was a 451. I don't know that they've had the explosive jump, and I think maybe for Detroit fans, they might look at New Jersey and say, we wish that was us. New Jersey making that turnaround too, it's a more dramatic turnaround than Detroit. So Detroit had New Jersey in the rearview mirror at this time last year, and now they're nowhere near. But I would still say overall for Detroit, it's been a solid enough year. I'll give them a C plus. I think they're a little bit above what was expected. They're not in the hunt for the playoffs really at this point. I mean, they sold and they're 6 points back. Plus, there's so many teams to get past to get in. But I think they've done well enough. I'm not going to throw them in the B category, but I think a C plus is fair. St. Louis, 59 points. This year they're 476, and their points percentage last year was a 665. For St. Louis, it's been bad through most of the season. We've seen Craig Berube upset after games a lot more this year than we did in his other years behind the bench. And just Blues players in general seeming to be upset during the game, after the game, before the game. And it's understandable. This has been a really disappointing season for a St. Louis team that was expected to be in this region of the standings, and instead they're over here. And of course they've had to sell off. I don't think they're going to be out of the playoffs that long, but again, sometimes that happens with a team where you go, well, they won't be out that long. Like 2012, Buffalo's out. They'll figure it out. We're still waiting. Philadelphia, 59 points, 468 points percentage. Last year was a 372 points percentage. I'm going to go ahead and say Philadelphia is right about where we expected them to be. I'm going to give them a C. At times early in the season and through about the middle of the season, that defense was keeping them in games and winning them games. Carter Hart was winning them some games. And Ersson had a great run going too. But eventually all that kind of falls apart, and you're left with a Philadelphia team that statistically is better than last year. But I think a lot of that can be measured by John Tortorella being the coach and the systems he's implemented more than anything else. Vancouver, 57 points, 452 points percentage. Last year it was a 561. They were without Demko for a large portion of the season. We've seen since Demko came back, and since Seelovs was brought up and he's given them decent goaltending, that the Canucks, there's some hope for next year. Again, I'd like to have seen them end up, further down the standings, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're only going to move up from here. I would expect them to pass Philadelphia and St. Louis and maybe even Detroit, because, Detroit we know has kind of fallen off, and St. Louis and Philly, things haven't been great either. But on the season, comparatively speaking with what was expected and just with everything that's gone on, I can't give Vancouver a passing grade. So I have to give them a D. And where I went to school, a D was a fail. You did not pass with a D. D pluses, they don't hand those out. Tommy Boy's right. So yeah, 452 for the Vancouver Canucks, D grade from me. Then you've got a 56 points, 444 points percentage for Montreal. Last year they were 335. I'm going to go ahead and say Montreal has kind of outperformed what was expected. C plus for Montreal. And the fact that they seem to enjoy playing for Marty St. Louis, he gets good offense out of these guys. You've got a pretty good young defense forming in Montreal as well. This team could be a lot of fun to watch next year. This team could do some damage next year with the right additions, with the right moves made by Kent Hughes. Who knows with Montreal? Arizona, 52 points, 413 is their points percentage this year. Last year it was a 348. I find it remarkable how much Andre Tourigny gets out of this team. So I'm going to give them a C plus as well, because the expectation was at least, down beneath Columbus here. And the fact they have 52 points and their points percentage has gone up for last year is just insane. I've been impressed with Arizona's work ethic. That's why I enjoy watching the Coyotes. The work ethic's always there, even if the results aren't. And I mean, then you get those fun, reverse retro jerseys every now and then too. Although that program is done for another year or two. So reverse retro here and all that. Anaheim, 50 points, 397 points percentage. Last year they were at 463. I don't know if we expected Anaheim to get worse, and remarkably worse. So Anaheim has gone from being a team that it looked like was ready to, maybe roll out of maybe roll into like the area Detroit is, right? Maybe in around that 500 mark. Instead, it's fallen off for them. I'm going to have to throw a D at them as their grade as well. Anaheim was expected to be towards the bottom, but this mark is even lower, I think, than what was expected. San Jose, 50 points, 391 points percentage. Last year they were 470. What was expected of San Jose? I don't know that it was any better than this. And so I kind of want to say D, but I think I'll chicken out. I'll throw a C minus at them. There've been some results that have been a bit of a surprise. I think if we were grading this by home and away, at home they're an F. San Jose at home is an F. On the road they're a C plus. They're winning their fair share of games on the road, even though their overall record isn't very good. So for San Jose, they're going to be an interesting one to watch next year too. Chicago, 49 points, 389 points percentage. 415 was their points percentage last year, but it's been good since the 1st of January. Now, it was said apparently in writing that the team they put on the ice the day of the trade deadline, so after the trades are done, might have been the worst roster put together in the salary cap era. But Chicago's won since that was quoted. So I will say for Chicago, they've won games that it wasn't expected that they would. We don't like to give out D pluses, do we? But I'm gonna say again, we expected this team to be awful. I can't give them a D because they were expected to end up flirting with one of the worst records in NHL history. This was a really bad roster right from the season start. The goaltending was just kind of it felt like it was thrown together, and it felt like this team was thrown together with the idea of, so we want Bedard being the whole, and that should have been the marketing campaign. Tanking hard for Bedard, Blackhawks way. Come witness as we do our best to secure a number one draft pick. But of course, the players don't tank. The coaches don't tank. And then at the bottom is Columbus, 46 points, 365 points percentage. Last year it was a 494. They've had some key injuries. Their goaltending has been mostly bad, although Korpisalo is playing well, so got to jettison him at the deadline. He's a pending UFA as well, but it is always interesting to me when a team trades a good goaltender at the deadline when they're near or at the bottom. So this kind of secures that for Columbus, they're going to end up finishing at the bottom. But after they sign Johnny Gaudreau, and after all of the additions that have been made over the last couple of years, this team was supposed to be better. Last year they had a 494 points percentage, which is better than New Jersey's, and yet here we are. And so it's the one F on the board is going to go to Columbus, because I think really from the start of the season until now it has been tough. I think they're 5-3-2 in their last 10, but it doesn't really make up for what's been a really, really rough year for Columbus fans, because this was supposed to be a better year. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.